Merci, Nick. Welcome. Bienvenue chez vous à l'ONF, dans la magnifique salle de cinéma Alanis au Bomsawin. The NFB acknowledges and thanks the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. L'ONF veut aussi reconnaître que depuis le début des années 40, nous avons produit des œuvres qui rendent compte de la vie et de l'expérience autochtone. Bien que le nombre de ces productions ait favorisé le développement de la compréhension entre les Autochtones et les non-Autochtones du Canada, d'autres ont contribué à façonner les perceptions racistes et colonialistes à l'endroit des peuples autochtones. Cette reconnaissance publique est pour l'ONF un... Mon nom est Aude Gagnon-Raymond et au nom de Téléfilm, je tiens à vous dire que nous sommes fiers de collaborer avec l'ONF afin de vous offrir une programmation qui permet... You're fine? Yeah. Qui permet à tous de prendre part à d'importantes réflexions et discussions. Cette initiative est présentée en partenariat avec Environnement et Changement climatique Canada. Sharing knowledge is essential, which is why we are taking this opportunity to amplify the voices of those who are helping us to build a more equitable, sustainable, and accountable future. À cet égard, je tiens à souligner la présence de Mme Mariann Bassey Orovwuje, mairesse de l'arrondissement de Verdun et membre du comité exécutif responsable de la transition écologique et de l'environnement à la Ville de Montréal. Mme Vauger, merci. Vous assistez aujourd'hui à la projection du film La racine du problème, la réalisatrice Jennifer Baichwal, qui est également avec nous aujourd'hui. Bonjour, Jennifer. Nous aurons la chance d'échanger avec elle et de nombreux experts sur les enjeux soulevés par le film dans une discussion qui suivra la projection. Nous sommes très chanceux aussi d'avoir la chance d'avoir une nouvelle panéliste se joindre à nous. Il s'agit de Mariann Bassey, qui est Deputy Executive Director of the Environmental Rights Action, Friends of the Earth Nigeria, and the Food Sovereignty Program Coordinator of Friends of the Earth Nigeria and Africa. Bienvenue. Pour lancer le tout, place au court-métrage d'animation Autoportrait du réalisateur Claude Loutier. Bonne projection. Ça va prendre une petite seconde avant que la régie se place.
Hi. I'm supposed to wait for a microphone. I wonder if our wonderful panelists can make their way down to sit, but and come and sit, and we'll talk a bit afterwards. But what? Oh, can you hear me? Is this hello? What? Okay. It's not working. Hello. Anyway, I'm just going to shout. There's somebody I really want to introduce to say a few words. Mayor Marie-Andrée Mauger is a leader in pesticide management and reduction. She's a bright light, and we're not. We all know that the island of Montreal has the most stringent pesticide regulations in all of Canada. She is the borough mayor of Verdun and the City of Montreal's executive committee member responsible for ecological transition and the environment. During her time in office, she's implemented numerous green initiatives to resist climate change, and together with Mayor Plante, made Montreal the first major city in Canada to introduce a bylaw that bans the use and sale of glyphosate. And she's a star. So please come and talk about your work.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. First thing I want to, je veux reconnaître votre magnifique travail. This is a wonderful and I would say a punch effect documentary film. C'est vraiment un très beau documentaire, très touchant. Je suis encore dans l'émotion du film. Je dois reconnaître que la Ville de Montréal est engagée depuis 2004 dans un règlement pour interdire les pesticides. Il y a quelques années, le règlement avait été actualisé pour interdire les néonicotinoïdes. Et récemment, 36 ingrédients actifs ont été ajoutés à la liste des pesticides interdits, dont le glyphosate. Et c'est entré en effet en vigueur le 1er janvier dernier. Donc, l'année dernière, si on s'était parlé l'année dernière, il y avait encore des produits sur les tablettes, les quincailleries, donc c'était en vente libre, le glyphosate et 35 autres ingrédients actifs. Et je dois remercier le travail de mes prédécesseurs parce que je suis responsable de l'environnement et de la transition écologique depuis 1 an. Donc, c'est un travail qui ne se fait pas tout seul. C'est bien sûr l'expertise de nos fonctionnaires, la volonté politique, bien sûr. Et humblement, le travail n'est pas terminé. Il reste 2 exceptions au règlement et on doit l'appliquer à l'ensemble de la ville pour tous les secteurs. I wanted to say that before I get involved in politics in 2013, I directed a few Major Land documentary film, so I know how much work it is. Jennifer told me she worked on this film for 4 years, and when we see how close she and how connected she got with Mr. Johnson, we know how, to develop this trust with him and to have this direct access to so many people. It means this genuine investment, and I'm sure you don't count your hours and you don't get paid for all the work that you do. So, je veux vraiment reconnaître cet investissement personnel de la part de la réalisatrice et de toute l'équipe, je n'en doute pas, les producteurs, toute l'équipe technique. On ne réussit pas à faire du documentaire. En fait, on gagne rarement sa vie en faisant un documentaire engagé. Alors, je veux reconnaître ça. J'ai fait un peu de documentaire avant de m'engager en politique et j'avais envie de ce travail engagé que j'ai transposé dans le milieu de la politique. Et ce qui me touche beaucoup dans ce film et on va en parler après, les panélistes vont nous en parler, c'est à quel point on a besoin de changer aussi notre rapport à la nature en ville et à la campagne et sortir de ce paradigme où on veut que les choses soient bien belles et tout en ordre. Et pourquoi, dans le fond, mettre des pesticides en ville, dans les parcs, c'est une pratique qui est absolument néfaste pour l'humain et pour les écosystèmes. Et on travaille de plus en plus à la Ville de Montréal à changer ce paradigme, à laisser pousser les prés fleuris, à adopter la gestion différenciée des espaces verts pour créer des habitats favorables aux insectes, aux papillons, aux oiseaux. Et les villes ont le potentiel de devenir des sanctuaires pour les pollinisateurs, justement parce que on n'a pas besoin d'utiliser les pesticides en ville, on n'a pas besoin de gazon parfait. Et les villes ont un rôle à jouer pour servir de modèle en ce sens-là. Et pendant la COP15, justement, grâce au collectif COP15, on s'est penché sur les causes sous-jacentes de la perte de biodiversité et on voit que nos valeurs associées à nos modes de vie ont une grande influence et on voit au Québec comme ailleurs au Canada cette pratique du dessécage, how do you say that? De faire sécher les récoltes pour que ce soit plus facile. Ça se passe partout, ça c'est desiccation. Donc, on a une grande prise de conscience et on voit donc, on espère que plusieurs municipalités feront un copier-coller du règlement de Montréal qui est en vigueur depuis le 1er janvier 2022 pour donner le courage de le faire et parce qu'on voit que... En tout cas, je trouve que ce documentaire a un effet coup de poing et j'espère qu'il sera bien vu. C'est la 2e projection publique seulement à Montréal, mais il faut le faire circuler parce qu'il est très, très beau. And again, I want to thank you, Jennifer, for this extraordinary work that you have done. Thank you.
Okay. Wait, I was supposed to say, are you giving me that? Merci d'être venu and Hello, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. I forgot to do that. We have the most incredible panel here of people, of experts, committed activists, and I'm going to invite them all to sit down, and then I'm going to tell you who they are. Okay. So I'll start with that side. Dr. Claudel Pétrin-Desrosiers is a family physician, and she's the lead for planetary health at the University of Montreal's Department of Family Medicine and Emergency Medicine. She's also chairs the Quebec Association of Physicians for the Environment. There she is. Mariann Bassey is the Deputy Executive Director of the Environmental Rights Action Friends of the Earth Nigeria and the Food Sovereignty Program Coordinator of Friends of the Earth Nigeria and Africa. She is also the chair of the Agroecology and Land Working Group of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. Troy Woodhouse is a proud member of the Flying Post 73 Indian Band and is a contributor to community, like a big contributor, not a little contributor, to community projects like Stop the Spray and Protect the Spirit Moose, both of which inform the public about the harmful use of non-essential pesticides and herbicides in forestry practices. Lorraine Rekmans is a member of the Serpent River First Nation and is the former Indigenous Affairs critic for the Green Party of Canada, past president of the Green Party of Canada, and former executive director of the National Aboriginal Forestry Association. Last but not least, Antonious Petro is the executive director of Regeneration Canada, a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting soil regeneration in order to mitigate climate change, restore biodiversity, improve water cycles, and support a healthy food system. That's just a little, it's just a small task. Before I ask everybody a question, I wanted to say a couple of things about the film. The first is that we basically kept this a secret for the whole time that we were making it, and our wonderful partners at Telefilm and Rogers and our broadcaster at the CBC, we all agreed to say that we were making a film on global insect collapse. And everybody kept that secret because we didn't want to be targeted early for our work, and it was really incredible that we all were able to do that. Secondly, many of you here might not know what errors and omissions insurance is, but it's insurance that you have to get in order to show a film. And oh my gosh, the fine-tooth comb that the lawyers went through our film in order to vet it so that it could get insurance was an extremely arduous process. So unlike a Michael Moore film, this is not a polemic that's just sort of throwing out accusations. Every single thing that is asserted in the film is backed up by evidence, either evidence that we gathered, like statistics, or evidence that was presented in court. So that's an important thing to remember when you see it. And the other thing is, and I'm so glad you brought this up, Mayor, we've been doing, that's my husband, Nick. We've been working together for nearly 30 years. And my background is in philosophy and theology. And so the ethics of engagement are the most important part of our work. And it's, I think I've said this before, but it's already an aggressive act to put a camera in somebody's face. And so, especially when you go around the world to different places, there is, the humility of engagement is an essential part of our work. And there's some hard scenes in there with Lee, but what I will say is that he asked us to film those scenes. He wanted people to know how hard it was for him just to get up in the morning. And so that that trust is a mutual trust. It goes both ways, and we're still very much collaborating with Lee as he comes, when his health permits, to some of our screenings. So I just wanted to say that from my perspective as a filmmaker. And to all of you, and we can go, maybe we go this way since we did the introductions the other way. I want to ask a general question about how each of your work and mission relates to the issues raised in the film. And I would say that the main issues raised, of course, are pesticides in human health, biodiversity loss, Indigenous rights, corporate malfeasance, agency capture, and the limitations of mass torts as a tool for justice. And it would be really interesting to hear all of your perspectives on how your work intersects with those issues. Do you want to start?
Hello, everybody. So we work with thousands of farms all over Canada. Lots of these farms are an average of 10,000 acre grain broadacre farms in the prairies, or corn and soybean here in eastern Canada. And the thing is, no farmer, I have never met a farmer in my work that wants to spray. The issue, as we saw in the movie, is that this is the tool available right now that for them is a miracle. So the issue is very deep, that we all have the responsibility as government and organization and individual to develop more tools that does not put the farmer between two hard choices, which is killing the plant mechanically or killing it chemically. So that's not a burden in a professional or like in my work, but I also want to say that at the very beginning of the movie, what touched me personally is that my late partner, she was the fittest and healthiest person I've ever met. Eating 100% organic, exercising, and she left us 6 months ago for a B-cell non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And the doctor said, "Oh, it's the environment." And then I lived with this woman, Caroline, for years and years, and it's as systemic as we cannot even imagine how it is in everywhere. It's in our water, it's in our air, it's in our plant, it's in our organic food, and I really like that you put that in there because, all these micro doses that are permitted. So yeah, that's, I'll stop here.
It's in our urine. There was just a study done, 80% of people have glyphosate in their urine, so that too. Lorraine.
Thank you. First, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Haudenosaunee territory and the historical relationship with the Anishinaabeg. And remember that it's not just a historical territory, it's a current territory. So the work that I do is largely in policy, Indigenous rights, writing policy, reviewing policy, just looking at advocating for a real nation-to-nation relationship between Canada and the original nations. And it strikes me that we have a new king, and we keep referring back as Indigenous people to King George and the Royal Proclamation that recognizes our sovereignty and stewardship role to protect our lands and manage our resources. So our policy work, my policy work going back 24 years or more, started in forest policy. And one of the questions I had for the M&R was, what's this stuff called Vision 2000 that you're spraying on our territory? And they just sent me a sheet from Monsanto. So I asked them, what is this? Where did you get an approval for this? And they said, oh, well, the province just uses the approval that comes from Ag Canada. So if it's good enough for agriculture, it's good enough for us. So it's always about pushing that envelope, looking at the historic relationship between the original peoples and the newcomers, and what that relationship was like, and what it could be again if there's real respect for Indigenous rights in Canada. This is beyond reconciliation. This is beyond the TRC. This talks about free, prior, informed consent, UNDRIP, recognizing real nations. And so that work, you know, you saw the people being subjected to policy decisions that they're not a part of. And this, you know, a new world where we govern ourselves, and that means Canadians govern themselves, and we govern ourselves, not corporations governing us. And I think that's, you know, pushing the envelope and pushing the thinking on policy. We are self-governing people, all of us. We're not controlled by corporations.
Wait, I just want to ask you to say that stat that we were talking about before of how many delegates are here.
Oh, so
Yes.
yes, so we're here at COP, and I am pleased to be here, so thank you for inviting me. But there are about 500 Indigenous delegates out of 15,000 registered for COP. And this is a problem. You know, like I was just telling someone, I was here 20 years ago at the Palais Congress in Montreal with the World Forestry Congress, where the first delegation of Indigenous people attended the World Forestry Congress. It's 20 years later, and I see that the level of participation is unacceptable when we are living close to the ecosystems, managing biodiversity, and understanding our connection to the ecosystem. We have an ecocentric worldview, and we need to be involved in these discussions in a place of equity and respect. So thank you.
I'd also like to give land acknowledgement, as you had, to the First Nations in the Montreal territory. How I can relate to the film and my work here is as a forestry technician, as a young man, I've seen firsthand within the forest practice how these forests look, like you were seeing in this film. You walk through these bushes and they're silent forests. There's no birds, there's no animals, they're monocrops, and you come to learn pretty quickly that it's just an industry. The government supports these industries without consent of First Nations. You know, I know within my community we have many band council resolutions, and with some of the communities I represent with the Mushkegowuk Tribal Council, they have court cases against the government telling them not to use these glyphosates on their land. And if they would just listen to the treaty rights and to the First Nations, I think we could all learn a lot about how to respect the environment and treat it. Through my work with Stop the Spray, you know, it's something that's across the country. There's Stop the Spray BC, there's Stop the Spray Alberta, we have Stop the Spray Ontario. It just brings information to the general public of these glyphosates being used in the forestry aspect, and just everywhere. You know, I used to always think the fight was against the industry, but more and more I learn it's more the government who approves these chemicals through agriculture and everything else. So I just hope that the government can work with the First Nations and the general people who want this change to facilitate the rules and laws that glyphosates are banned. Miigwech.
First of all, I want to say thank you and thanks for coming. I want to thank my colleague Beatrice for accompanying me here, and my colleague also, Ali, who is also fighting corporate intimidation and bullying in Burkina Faso. Watching that film, I was almost at the brink of tears. I heard the mother say, I am angry. I am also very angry. I am upset. How can the regulated be so influential on the regulator? How is that even possible? It's the same thing that is happening in Nigeria, in Burkina Faso, in almost all African countries. You see government officials, people who are supposed to be protecting us, parroting corporations, and almost acting as like their PRO agents. How is that even possible? I listened to this film, I was like, oh my God, thank you, Dwayne. Thank you for being the voice. Thank you for speaking out. Thank you for fighting the monsters, as you call them. What is going on in the US, in Canada, is happening even in unimaginable scales in Africa. We do have glyphosate, and Monsanto makes it feel as if it is an economic benefit to the people. I mean, they are helping our people. In 2016, Monsanto got his permit for maize approved. With that maize comes a cocktail of glyphosate. You buy the maize, and you also have to use the glyphosate. And they're talking about people in the communities who are not educated. I mean, Dwayne is educated, and he says, I mean, you cannot, and even like one lady was saying, do these corporate monsters even read their labels? How many people will read the instructions to know how to spray them before using them? Recently, there's been a spike in people getting sick. In the past 3 years, I've had to undergo 15 surgeries. And he said something, you are what you eat. Is it possible that the food that is supposed to nourish us is now killing us, poisoning us? Monsanto operates, and they said something. They have access to government officials that ordinary citizens are not able to gain access. They're operating in some cases like the government themselves. That fame, it's almost like I'm seeing a picture of my beloved Africa. Monsanto is undermining basic human rights to healthy food, healthy environment, and they should be made to be accountable. You can't go about killing people just to make money. And our government should know that they cannot always take the sides of these corporations, chemical companies, in fact, merchants of death, because they are selling death. They said they knew what they were doing. My grandmother always tells me, Mariann, if you are hiding what you are doing, then you should not be doing it. If anybody that hides what they are doing, they know what they are doing, you shouldn't be doing that. They were hiding it. They knew their products were causing cancer, and yet they were selling them because they wanted to make money at the expense of people's lives, people's health. People are dying, leaving children to be orphaned, widows. It is just horrible. I work with an international NGO and also work with a network, AFSA, Friends of the Earth. We represent communities, indigenous people, who are constantly being bullied, harassed, and intimidated by these corporations. This film is going to go a long way. We're going to show it to communities and let them know that they have a voice, that they can fight back. It might take time, but surely victory will be certain. Thank you so much.
Oh, wow. I like that. Victory will be certain. I hope that is true. I wanted to just bring two things up in that, the idea of agency capture and how there was one of the lawyers who was in our film, who was not in the film. In fact, he went to jail. He was not part of that illustrious group. But he said to me, make no mistake, the FDA works for the drug companies and the EPA works for the chemical companies, period. And it was just such a depressing moment to understand that agency capture. The other thing that I wanted to bring up that the mayor brought up, because it was a little bit, we didn't really go into it too much in the film, and Antonious, you might be able to speak to this after Claudel speaks, but it's the use of Roundup as a desiccant. So this idea that you spray it on crops right before harvest in order to dry them out evenly. And what that means is that it's being sprayed directly on food. And this, one of the things that we were going to bring up in the film that we weren't allowed to, given the legal sort of vetting that was done, was that I think it was it 2006? When it started to be used as a desiccant? So the spike in irritable bowel, celiac, Crohn's, etc., was paralleled with that moment when people started to use it to spray it directly on food. And there's a lot of research going on now, and Claudel, you'll know about this, into the microbiome, not just our microbiomes, but the microbiomes of animals and insects and soil and plants. And the effects are, it's an antibiotic, so the effects are I think, quite devastating. Claudel?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Claudel. I'm a family doctor. I work in Hochelaga Maisonneuve. I'm also a board member of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, an NGO that has been working in Canada for about 30 years now at the intersection of health and the environment. CAPE was created 30 years ago by doctors who believed that links should be made between our environment and our health. And for many years, and I've been involved in this sphere for about 10 years now. And we often are lonely voices in the room. It started to change, but for a while, and I can imagine what my colleagues went through 30 years ago, but we were told that we didn't belong in spaces that were discussing the environment, and in our health communities, we were told that we should treat people and not care about the planet. And at the core of foundation of the work that CAPE is doing was the work around pesticides. And I just want to take a few minutes to highlight the work that two of my colleagues have done, especially in Montreal, Jean Zigby and Eric Nottebart, two wonderful family doctors that work in family medicine and emergency. Eric Nottebart was notably sitting on the pesticide committee for the city of Montreal, and was one of the reason that this regulation is such as ambitious as it is today. So I come from an environmental climate perspective, more or less, and I've grown to the pesticide world of CAPE because I've been involved in this organization for a while. But we do anchor our vision in a world that, health is not only something that is treated in a hospital or in a clinic, but we recognize that if we want human to be healthy, we need a healthy planet. And that is basically the definition of what planetary health is, which is recognizing that health is dependent of the ecosystem on which it depends on. And it seems to be, so obvious when you say it like that. But when you do actually implement this vision, it changes the whole way you decide and manage healthcare. And the movie made me very, very angry. But I think it also really relates in a way that I think what strikes me the most is how tiny we are compared to those big corporations. And it's, oops, my mic stopped working. All right, it's back on. We're trying to fight climate change because it's the biggest human threat to health of the 21st century. And recently I'm just going to make this short parenthesis, but fossil fuel companies have access to government in ways we don't have. So there was a researcher that tried to look at how many meetings the government of Canada had, I think it was in 2020, with fossil fuel rep. And they had about 1,200 in that year. How many meetings they had with environmental groups? About 300. So obviously we are outsmarted, right? Because I'm doing this freely. Like most of my work I do for CAPE is free. I do that on my free time, which is very little. But I don't have the money that Monsanto have to hire companies, to hire liars and build evidence and falsify data. But this is what we are. It's going to be back on soon. Thank you. But it's this with fossil fuels. It is this with pesticide. It's this with pollution. We recently were against it in CAPE for air pollution in Rouyn-Noranda for people in Quebec, with arsenic regulation, and even in Quebec City with the nickel. The government sort of just went with the industry, what the industry wanted. And I think it just reminded us that we need to get together if we want to have a chance to have a voice against those big corporations. I think we need to stand together, and this is what I recall from this movie, is that we need to stand together, and I think that's something that it's not always easy to do, but that's something we must do for nature and ourselves.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, when you see that the PR budget, the public affairs budget was $17 million to fight against the IARC, recommendation about probable carcinogenicity, that's a staggering amount. So what do we do? And we can get together. There's the what's her name from Harvard? The 3.5%. Erica Chenoweth, who did a paper that talked about what a percentage of the population is needed to create positive change. and she did this survey of history and found that it was only 3.5%, and it was nonviolent. So that's the kind of thing that we have to take hope, take some hope from. Okay, well, I've just been told by Nick that we don't have a lot of time, so instead of asking a second question, I'm going to open it up to this, very knowledgeable audience for questions to any and all of us. Yes. Do we have a mic for? Okay. Okay, good. Yeah. Here.
No, I think you should keep yours. Okay.
There was one person here and one person there. Why don't we start here? Yes.
Oui, je vais juste dire trois choses. Je me présente, Ali Tapsouba, je viens du Burkina Faso. Je suis un activiste des droits humains et la protection de la biodiversité. Féliciter la réalisation de ce film parce que c'est très émouvant. Et demander, est-ce que ce film est libre? Pouvons-nous diffuser ça en Afrique? Parce qu'actuellement, la législation dans les pays en Europe, au Canada, vous arrivez à empêcher qu'on utilise le Roundup, mais comme Mariann l'a dit, actuellement, c'est l'Afrique qui est devenue le laboratoire à ciel ouvert pour ces multinationales. Le Roundup, il est vendu partout, n'importe comment, parce que la législation, elle est poreuse. Et ça crée tellement de dégâts dans le milieu rural africain. Et à la fin, de toute façon, les produits qui sont là-bas, parfois, c'est exporté encore vers vos pays. Et quand on parle de Monsanto, le Burkina a connu Monsanto, qui a flatté nos paysans de coton, qui vont introduire un gène pour améliorer la qualité du coton, mais à la fin, ça a été pire parce que non seulement le cotonnier n'arrivait pas à donner un rendement, la qualité de la fibre elle était mauvaise et ça a ruiné la filière coton. C'était des milliards de pertes et des devises au niveau national. Des paysans ont eu envie de se suicider et on a vu comment des animaux ils mouraient lorsqu'ils mangeaient les restes des cotonniers. Donc c'est pour dire que quand j'ai vu ce film, c'est très touchant. Et vous allez voir les statistiques, elle est de la santé, elle peut vérifier. La santé publique dans les pays africains montre une recrudescence des cancers. Nous n'avons pas une étude forcément pour dire est-ce que c'est lié au Roundup ou pas, mais nous sommes en droit de nous poser des questions au vu de ce film parce que chez nous, le Roundup est utilisé partout. Merci.
I'm doing the translation of the. Je fais la traduction pour les questions. Fait que si vous posez les questions en français, juste les poser très rapidement, peut-être en segments pour que je puisse ne pas oublier vos mots. So he's from Burkina Faso, asking if the movie is. Did you get that part? Yes, if the movie can be shown freely in different places around the world because he believes it needs to be seen, as the laws in most of the African country are not as strong as what we were starting to see here in North America and would benefit from the information. And shared story about how the use of Roundup is causing damage on the cotton field and the workers, and some even on the verge of suicide. So asking again mostly if the movie can be seen freely around the world and how we can make that happen.
Well, we should exchange information, or with where are you, Jackie? Or with Jackie, because we're in the middle of a global impact campaign with the film, and there are a number of inflection points in regulatory reviews that are going on right now. In Canada, we have where there's a moment where the PMRA is trying to raise the acceptable residue levels of glyphosate in food. We are fighting against that. In the United States, the EPA has been forced to reevaluate glyphosate, both in terms of carcinogenicity and in terms of biodiversity effects. And of course, the EU is about to, they have to renew glyphosate. And so that's probably going to happen sometime mid-next year. So we're doing a screening for the EU Parliament. And there is a real chance that the EU will, I mean, I'm just like praying that there will be greater restrictions or a ban, which will then have a cascading effect to exporting agricultural countries. So it will that could we're really putting a lot of effort into that. So right now the film it's playing around the world. We can play it anywhere that we want. We'd have to translate probably in some cases, but we should talk and try to find a way that we can make that happen. There was, yeah. Oh, and we have just great partners in the from Friends of the Earth and from Environmental Defence and others, but and yes, and Canadian Geographic.
Hi. Okay, so I'm Beatrice Orovwuje with Friends of the Earth in Canada, and I'm just really, really wanting to say how grateful we are to Jennifer and Nick and your team for this film. It is what we need for inspiration and will support, I think, a lot of us in trying to do what we're trying to do. But what I wanted to point out is, you know, many of us have been campaigning on glyphosate for a long time, and for neonics, and before that for other chemicals. And it's a system, and we have to keep doing that, but we have to change the system, not just fight chemical by chemical. And this past week, as the Conference of the Parties started, the FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, had its governing council, where it was proposing to sign letters of intent with all kinds of pesticide manufacturers. And that's just one example of how the corporations have infiltrated the organs of the UN. However, the good news is in a side meeting with the Secretary General, Mr. Gutierrez, last week, the CBD Alliance, which regroups many of our groups, met with him and discussed his passion for making the UN decision-making free of corporate capture. It's a huge challenge. I think the man is a saint, but I think all of us who talk about what we need as organizations from our governments, we also need to figure out how to support him while he's there in the UN, because the next Secretary General may not be so good on this question. So I just wanted to raise that. We've got like many tiers of influence. I very much like the point about how we have to work together, but we have to think globally as well as locally. We've got many opportunities, and this film is going to be a great tool, so thank you.
If I could just interject, I think one of the big problems with the UN is it doesn't even recognize the original nations. It's a representative body of colonial states that leave our voices outside the door. I have to say that.
We had a couple more questions. There was one there. Yeah.
I think I can project.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I'm not as knowledgeable as many of the audience here, so forgive me if the question's silly and perhaps a bit tone deaf. I've been focusing very carefully on what everybody's been saying. Yeah, better. And I heard about the forests, I heard about the cities, and I heard about the farms, and I didn't hear the solution. And as Beatrice was pointing out, fighting chemical after chemical is just going to be a long, drawn-out, never-ending battle. So my question is, what is the answer for the farming? I'm sure half the people in the room know the answer, but I didn't hear that answer presented in the film or by anybody yet. It sounded like, well, it's either mechanical or chemical, but what is the solution? How do we get out of this mess from an agricultural perspective?
Well, and the thing at the end, they haven't done it yet, by the way, taken glyphosate out as the active ingredient of Roundup, but they're supposed to. But of course, it's still going to be available for industrial and agricultural use. So I think the person to answer that question is...
Yes. The only positive thing about the story is that there are solutions. And I was telling my colleague here that I drove through the prairies this summer, and I visited around 200,000 acre of regenerative agriculture, regeneratively grown pulses and grains, and so there are solutions in if you want to eliminate, and there are also solutions that might be easier on the farm under economics to reduce. So there are practices that our farmers are implementing to reduce their consumption of pesticide in general by up to 85%. I think I wrote here the very last sentence. If we ban glyphosate tomorrow, which everybody here hopes, and me included, they have another list of well-established active ingredients that would be in place. So what, in my very humble opinion, the solution, the activism that we are doing, like just showing the truth to people, is one powerful tool. Another powerful tool should be a pragmatic transition plan over a very concise timeline to see how to help our farmers, our cities, our municipalities to go out of pesticide in a way that does not harm anybody's wallet. And not only for the economic, because we know how it works. You know, it's all about voting. It's all about alliances. So before going with a stick to say, well, as of tomorrow you won't be able to use that, we need to provide resources. We need to devote more money. The cup cans. You read this twice about how much we should put to restore biodiversity. Was it like 200 billion?
It was so one of the headlines was, COP says invest $250 billion in nature or beware of the risks or beware of the outcome.
So 1% of this could us more resources and knowledge on how to reduce or to eliminate pesticide with the tools that we have right now. But we're missing largely a political will because, again, of the influence of big companies. So we can chat a lot about solution. They are here. Canada has lots of pioneer farmers and ranchers that implement this. And the sentence that we hear all the time is, my neighbor thinks I'm crazy. I think one central piece, and I'll stop after, is that we also need to shift our reflection from yield to profit. There is this pressure that we put in our shoulder and falsely that we need to feed the world. And I really love what you said, Lorraine, about we actually don't have to feed the world. We just need to feed ourselves. We can't argue this. But I think, I lost my train of thought at the very end, talking about feeding the world because it's a big thing. But there are solutions, and I would be happy to discuss it with you if you want.
So shortly, can I just add something? I'm sorry. In Africa, in our organizations now, there's I don't know if you've heard about the term agroecology. We are making a coherent-based case for agroecology. It's agriculture in harmony with nature, not against it. So there's everything, there's evidence. There have been cases, more than 1,000 cases. If you go to the Alliance of Food Sovereignty in Africa website, you'll see what community people, indigenous people are doing. So these things are not strange, they are not alien, they are solutions. So you hear them say, when you use these chemicals, you are interrupting nature, it will push back. So these things are there already. They are not being invented. And all the government needs to do is to at least give our farmers some incentives, encourage them, and I can tell you they can feed the world. Thank you.
Yeah. So I wanted to jump in too, because I wanted to say that the forests are our gardens as Indigenous people. That's where we source our food from. And I think accountability and scientific rigor are the answers, right? So if you think as Canadians that the government is managing your resources in trust for you, then that's the social contract and the social license you give the regulators. And you have to understand the power that you have. You have the power in the marketplace, you have the power to call for organic and sustainably sourced products. That's the power that belongs to the people. But we write the policy. Canadians write policy. That's what we do. We set out the perimeters. And systemic change, I'm glad that Bea brought that up. We need systemic change. And we need to change the way that we work with each other, right? It's got to be collaborative. And I just wanted to add one thing. The other thing is traditional ecological knowledge cannot be undervalued. Someone said time, and you saw the insect collectors. Indigenous people live that close to the earth that they know the changes, right? They have that scientific knowledge that is of value to the scientific community. It has to be included in policy and decision making.
Yeah, I think maybe mine is more of a comment than a question. But I'm from Ghana. I live in Ottawa. And I got an opportunity to meet with rural farmers in Ghana. Some who are using these harmful chemicals. And to the question in the back around what is the solution is not even just one around just banning the harmful chemicals. It was also looking at urbanization, deforestation, poverty, so many different levels, right? Because a lot of the farmers will tell you that, they spray it because of the labor, right? There's a huge labor shortage, especially when all the young people have moved to the city. And it's mostly seniors that are living in the villages and they don't have, and then these companies and corporations, like shown in this video, the way they're able to use governments and to use these agents of governments to go into villages to talk to people about using chemicals, I think it's also very important to know. So I think to think about it, I think the issue is it cannot, depending on the regions, we would need to look at what is the issue there, poverty being one, mining, right? There's so many mining from like King Cross, to call King Cross out, one of the companies that are mining in a lot of these countries that is also displacing people from their lands, from their food, from their sources. So I think we just need to look at the issue from, I guess, a holistic view, from, the banning of these harmful chemicals, but also looking at some of the other main challenges as well on the ground for people. Thanks.
Oh, I wish we could talk forever. And it's absolutely right. The holistic perspective, the united perspective. I will say, and we're not going to be overtly political here because we're in a government building, but we do have a campaign and an impact campaign. And if anybody wants to know more about that, this is the person, Jackie or Lara, part of our incredible impact team. Talk to us. But what I will say is that the reason that we have this petition, you might think it's naive to outright ban glyphosate, but they did it in Montreal, so, you can do it. But also, this is a parliamentary petition, so what it means is that it will be presented in Parliament, it will be debated in Parliament. It's not just like a petition that people sign because they believe it, and we're trying to get that conversation happening here. It's already happening all over the world. But I agree that to me it is that combination, whatever it is, however we can make it work, of thinking holistically, but also being united. And remember that 3.5%, that's us in this room. We can do it. Do we have one? Can we have one more?
With the use of the interpreter.
Sure.
I'm deaf. Thank you so much for coming here today. It's a very interesting subject. Biodiversity is the key for a healthy planet. I don't understand why many companies spray the forest and other environments when the government knows that we need to protect the natural environment. Especially when it comes down to the food that we produce in our fields. Like, the government knows this, but why do they allow this to continue?
Is it because it's financially profitable for them, so they accept this and they just keep quiet and they let the companies do what they do? Because that's what it looks like to me. And I want it to stop. They need to know that. They have power with the money or what?
I think Claudel.
Yeah, I don't have all the answers, but I will compare to something that we know in medicine. So a while back, it was well known that, we would have pharmaceutical reps in the hospital. They would buy us, dinner, food. They would send us traveling around the world. And we thought as doctors, we were smart enough to not be influenced by what they would tell us or the data they would show us. But there's been scientific studies that show that when we are in contact with pharmaceutical rep, we do get influence, even if we think we don't. So we've stopped, right? So now there's been laws and regulations about how do we connect and intervene with pharmaceutical rep. They're not allowed anymore on, they can come to my clinic. We don't have lunch paid by them. When they fund conferences, they just put their money and then they don't interact directly with us. So it's been done in medical field, and I think this is something we need to get inspired by because it can be done. And I do believe that some of our reps, MPs are well intended, and they think they are not influenced by the level of information they do get, but it gets you at the end of the day. And so I think, and this is something as doctors we've put forward in briefs around climate action and so on in the last couple of years, we think we need to get, when it comes to policy making, we need to get to a one-on-one basis. So like, if you meet one rep, you need to meet one scientist, you need to meet someone from the science, you need to meet someone from the environmental perspective, you need to meet one person from Indigenous group, but there's need to be a plurality of voices, and we need to stop thinking that we are above the information, because we're not. We are subject to bias. Our brain functions like that, and I think I don't think the government is against us, and but I believe in people, that people are well intended, but I think our brains sometimes act up a little bit, so we need to work around that by providing a set of regulation, as we did in medicine for pharmaceutical rep, to allow us to make the best decision and the best attention for the patients. And I think policymakers can make that on a federal and,
I just
level.
want to add something to that conversation too, is that we should listen to the kids, we should listen to the youth. They're the closest to the creator. They're non-biased. They have a voice too. If we listen to the children, they'll tell you straight up, why would you put that stuff on your food? So I think it's important to bring the kids into this conversation too, and that they should have a platform and their voices should be heard also.
Yeah. Well, Troy, you talked about 7 generations, and that I just think that's a very crucial perspective, if you want to just say a last word on that.
Yeah, I mean, part of our teachings and the creator's teachings is we have to look out for the next 7 generations. What are we going to leave our future children? So we have to be mindful of that and just work together with our hearts, with all our different partners, and really just put the good work in there. For me, I lay down my tobacco daily, and I just know that, I have hope. It seems hard sometimes to not have hope when you're fighting these huge corporations, but at the end of the day, with hope, gives hope to the next generations, and I think that'll start facilitating the change.
Let's get all First Nations recognized by the UN, and then I bet something's going to change if we do that.
I think we should get a charter, a charter that guarantees us a right to healthy food as a basic human right. I can't believe it's not in the Charter of Freedoms. But I think his question was good. It was about the disconnect, right? So I look at policy and how it gets implemented. And if you read the Crown Forest Sustainability Act in Ontario, it sounds really nice. They want healthy forests and diverse ecosystems. And then you get into the act and you see all the exemptions. But the application, it loses something in translation as it's siloed down through all the different departments. We don't have a comprehensive, holistic approach to managing resources. That's a problem.
I think we have to stop, which I'm really sad about, but I'm so grateful. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you for coming. Thank you to these incredible panelists for your work, for your perspective, and everything that you do. And also to Telefilm and the NFB for organizing this beautiful series, the Biodiversity Break. I like it. And if you haven't done the VR stuff downstairs, go down because they're awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's my need. When I used to get mad at the industry, and it comes down to the government.
So we're trying to like get our act together. Like apologies. I lost my dad. He died from mind relations. Yeah, definitely. That would be great. Uranium was Thank you for sharing. You know what? Yes. Yeah, I'm floating around here. Yeah. How are you? Are you doing presentation? No, I had a but it was sort of a quite repetition. But I appreciate it. Thank you. It's different. Well, it's different in the sense of I'm meeting for sure. We're trying. Yeah, no. Like it's work that I'm really excited about and passionate about. So I work with Oh, that's happening? Okay. Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Would you believe we've seen each other in this event tonight? And I didn't know it was you.
Merci beaucoup. Can I please ask you? I'm very interested in I'm student. Thank you very much. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
No, I wasn't there. Oh, we took a picture and share with them. Because everyone's sorry. I'm just a numb up with the wives.
We're right in the hallway. Yeah. Yes. There's another screening.
We're getting out of here. Oh, look at you. You're trying to
We can chat in the hall.
Oh,
so it's not over. It's just we have to move to the hall, right?
Yeah. Let me get my bag.
Si on a des contacts, si on peut faire des productions, s'organiser avec des organismes, des individus, faire ça, c'est pas encore parce que c'est juste le début de tout le processus.
Hey.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How'd that go?
Awesome.
Amazing. What
Yeah.
an interesting conversation, wasn't it? I don't know if you
Yeah.
could even listen because you're probably so focused on the technical, but it was really amazing.
No, I was fully tuned in.
Yeah, wow. Mariann, man, you're a seriously powerful speaker.
Thank you.
I rarely do that for a living. I'm just like, I'll follow you wherever you go. That's how I felt, right? I was like,
Yeah.
I was crying.
Yeah.
This man is, and I was speaking in the match yesterday.